I've always prided myself on being prepared. Boy Scout training, wilderness survival courses, top-of-the-line gear. I thought I had all the bases covered. Turns out, Mother Nature doesn't give a damn about your merit badges or your REI membership. It was supposed to be a simple day hike in the Adirondacks, 6 hours tops. I'd done it a dozen times before, but I guess there's always a first time for everything, including getting hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. It started with a wrong turn, or maybe I misread my map. Either way, by mid-afternoon, I knew I was in trouble. The familiar trails had given way to unmarked wilderness, and the sky was darkening with ominous storm clouds. I tried retracing my steps, but in the dense forest, everything looked the same. As the first raindrops fell, panic started to set in. I fumbled for my phone, but out here it was nothing more than a fancy paperweight. Maybe a flashlight. No signal at all. The rain turned into a downpour, and darkness fell faster than it had any right to. I found some shelter under a rocky overhang and tried to think. I had food, water, and warm clothes. I could survive the night, but the thought of spending hours in the pitch-black forest, alone and lost, made my stomach churn. That's when I saw the first light. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, another hiker maybe, or a search party. I shouted, my voice hoarse with relief, but there was no response. The light flickered, a pale blue glow bobbing between the trees. It seemed to be moving away from me. Without thinking, I followed. Hey, I called out. Wait, I need help. But the light kept moving, weaving through the trees with an unnatural grace. It was joined by another, then another. Soon, a string of ghostly lights danced before me, leading deeper into the forest. Part of me knew this wasn't right. Lights in the woods at night, moving like that. Every campfire story I'd ever heard screamed at me to turn back. But where else could I go? At least the lights were leading me somewhere. I stumbled after them, slipping on wet leaves and tripping over hidden roots. The rain had soaked me to the bone, but I barely noticed. All my focus was on those mesmerizing lights. They moved faster now, and I struggled to keep up. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with exertion. But I couldn't lose sight of them. They were my only hope. Suddenly, the lights winked out. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding. No, I whispered. No, please, come back. For a moment, all was darkness. Then, slowly, a soft glow began to spread around me. It wasn't coming from any one source, but seemed to emanate from the forest itself. The trees, the ground, even the air shimmered with a faint, strange light. And in that light, I saw them. They weren't much taller than me, but their proportions were all wrong, limbs too long and thin, heads too large and oddly shaped. Their skin, if you could call it that, rippled with the same pale light that filled the clearing. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I was frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. One of them stepped forward. Its face was featureless, save for two large, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to swirl with starlight. A voice echoed in my head, though the creature's face didn't move. You followed. I managed to find my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm lost. I need help. The being tilted its head, an oddly human gesture. Many become lost in these woods. Few find their way to us. What are you? I asked. A ripple passed through the group, almost like laughter. We are the forgotten, the in-between, neither here nor there, but everywhere. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Are you aliens? Another ripple, stronger this time. We have been here longer than your kind has walked upright. We have watched your cities rise and fall, your empires crumble to dust. We are of this earth, and yet apart from it. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry despite the rain. Can you help me? Can you show me the way back? The being's eyes seemed to grow brighter. We can show you many ways, ways you've never dreamed of, paths between worlds, shortcuts through time and space. A thrill of excitement cut through my fear. You mean you could take me anywhere? Anytime? For a price, the voice in my head whispered. I hesitated. Every story I'd ever read warned about making deals with mysterious beings. But then again, how many people ever got an opportunity like this? What kind of price? I asked. The being stretched out a hand, long fingers glowing softly. A memory, a moment of your life given to us freely. We collect them, you see. Experiences, emotions, fragments of human existence. I thought about it. Just one memory. It seemed like a small price to pay for what? Adventure? Knowledge? A way home? All of the above? Any memory? I asked. The being nodded. Your choice, but choose wisely. The more precious the memory, the farther we can take you. I closed my eyes, thinking back over my life. What could I give up? What would I be willing to lose? And then I knew. I opened my eyes, meeting the star-filled gaze of the being. My 10th birthday, I said. The last one before my dad left. It was a good day. A warmth seemed to emanate from the creature. A cherished memory. Are you certain? I nodded, pushing away the pang of loss I already felt. I'm sure. The being's hand touched my forehead, cool and tingly. For a moment, I was back there. The cake, the presents, the laughter. And then, nothing. A blank spot where the memory used to be. Even now, telling the story, I know I had a 10th birthday. I know what numbers are, and I know it was the one before my dad left. And I remember that it was good because that's how I described it. But the memory itself is gone. When I lowered my hand, the clearing had changed. The rain had stopped, and the first light of dawn was peeking through the trees. But these weren't the same trees. The air smelled different, saltier, somehow. Where are we? I asked. The being gestured to a gap in the trees. See for yourself. I stepped forward on shaky legs. As I emerged from the forest, I gasped. Before me stretched a vast ocean, waves crashing against rocky cliffs. And there, silhouetted against the rising sun, stood a circle of massive stone monoliths. Stonehenge, I breathed. But how? A small step for us, the being said. A giant leap for you. I turned back, 1,000 questions on my lips, but the being raised a hand. We must return. You cannot be seen. In another moment, I was back in the clearing. I looked toward where I had just seen Stonehenge and found only trees. When I turned back to ask the first of those 1,000 questions, the beings were gone. I thought at first it had to be some kind of hallucination, brought on by stress or dehydration. But I knew it was real because I felt the gap in my memory where my 10th birthday should have been. I tried to grasp for things that weren't there anymore but before were always present. In the place of the memory, though, I had a weird sort of knowledge. I wasn't lost anymore. I knew exactly how to get out of the woods, even though I still had no conscious idea of where I was. The walk back to the trailhead was almost on autopilot. My mind was reeling. What had I just seen? What had I just experienced? I got back home safely, obviously, but I've never quite been the same since. I try not to let it consume me. I don't think that's healthy, but it's hard not to dwell on something so incredible. You can believe me or not. If you don't, I can't really blame you. I know how it sounds, but something very real happened to me out there, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to go back to before. I've always been a bit of a loner, which is why I love solo camping trips. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that recharges my batteries like nothing else. But after what happened on my last trip to the Ozarks, I'm not sure I'll ever feel the same about being alone in the woods again. It was early October, and the weather was perfect for camping. Crisp and cool, with just enough bite in the air to make a campfire feel heavenly. I had hiked deep into the Mark Twain National Forest, far from any established campgrounds. As the sun began to set, I found a small clearing near a babbling creek and set up my tent. The first couple of days were bliss. I spent my time hiking, reading, and simply soaking in the solitude. The forest was alive with autumn colors, maples flaming red, oaks in burnished gold, and the occasional flash of a cardinal winging through the canopy. At night, I'd sit by my small fire, listening to the whisper of the wind through the leaves and the gentle hooting of owls. But on the third night, things took a turn that I still can't fully explain. I may never be able to. I had just finished my dinner of dehydrated stroganoff when I noticed how bright it was getting. Peering through the canopy of oak and hickory trees, I saw the full moon rising, so luminous, it was almost like daylight. I doused my campfire, grabbed a thermos of tea, and decided to do a bit of stargazing before turning in. As I settled onto a fallen log, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The usual nighttime chorus of crickets and frogs fell silent, and even the creek seemed to quiet its burbling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct feeling of being watched. That's when I heard it. A wolf's howl, low and mournful, echoing through the trees. Now, I knew there were wolves in Missouri, but they're incredibly rare and usually stay far from humans. This one sounded close, too close. I was about to retreat to my tent when the howl came again. And this time, I froze in place because, mixed in with that animal sound, I could have sworn I heard words, "Help me." My heart began to race. It had been my imagination, right? Maybe the wind was playing tricks, or my mind was trying to make sense of an unfamiliar sound. I strained my ears, waiting. The third howl removed all doubt. It was definitely a wolf's cry, but layered within it, as clear as day, was a human voice. "Please help." I stood up, my legs shaking. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" Silence fell again, heavy and oppressive. Then came a rustling from the underbrush about 50 yards away. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on just in time to catch a glimpse of something large moving through the shadows. It was roughly the size and shape of a wolf, but something was off. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it wasn't quite used to its own body. As my light fell upon it, the creature turned its head toward me. For as long as I live, I will never forget those eyes. They were unmistakably human, filled with intelligence and, most disturbingly, a profound sadness. They locked onto mine for just a moment before the creature darted away. I couldn't catch my breath for a few seconds, and I was shaking like a leaf. I knew I had just encountered something. But what? For the rest of the night, I huddled in my tent, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The howls continued, sometimes near, sometimes far, always with that haunting undercurrent of human speech. I caught words and phrases. Trapped, save us. Each one sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across my skin. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the howls finally ceased. I broke camp in record time, my hands shaking so badly I could barely roll up my sleeping bag. As I hurried down the trail, my mind raced with questions. What had I seen? What had I heard? Was it some elaborate prank? Or had I stumbled upon something truly supernatural? The hike back to my car was a blur. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, and every breeze through the leaves sounded like whispered words. When I finally reached the trailhead, I nearly wept with relief at the sight of my old, beat-up Subaru. I've spent countless hours since then researching local legends and myths. I found whispers of tales, stories of shamans who could take the form of wolves, of cursed individuals trapped between human and animal. The Ozarks are steeped in folklore, with tales of shapeshifters and spirit animals passed down through generations of native tribes and settlers alike. One story in particular keeps coming back to me. An old Cherokee legend speaks of a clan of warriors who could take on the form of wolves to protect their people. But the legend warns that those who stay too long in wolf form risk losing their humanity, becoming trapped between worlds. Could that be what I encountered? A being caught between human and wolf crying out for help? Or was it something else entirely? Something beyond my comprehension? I've thought about reporting it to the authorities or to some paranormal research group, but I'm not sure even they would believe me. Most days, I'm not even sure I believe myself. But then night falls, and I hear a distant howl, and I find myself straining to hear words in its cry. That trip changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I used to seek out solitude, embracing the peace of wild places. Now, I find myself wondering about the thin veil between our world and others we can't comprehend. What other secrets do the forests hold? what other voices might be crying out just beyond the edge of our understanding. I still camp occasionally, but never alone, and never during a full moon. And whenever I hear a wolf's howl echoing in the distance, a part of me always listens for words, for that plea for help that I was unable or unwilling to answer on that fateful night. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in those woods. But in the dreams, I'm braver. I follow the howls, pushing through the underbrush until I come face to face with the wolf that isn't quite a wolf. In these dreams, I reach out, trying to help, to understand. But just as my fingers brush its fur, I always wake up, heart pounding, sheets tangled around me. I've tried to convince myself that it was all just a hallucination, a trick of the light and the loneliness playing on an overactive imagination. But deep down, I know what I saw, what I heard, and I can't help but wonder. If I had stayed, if I had been braver, could I have helped? Could I have solved the mystery of the moonspeak? There are nights when the moon is full and bright, and I find myself drawn to the window, staring out at the treeline. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a pair of all too human eyes staring back at me from the shadows. In those moments, I feel the pull of the forest, the weight of an unanswered call for help. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night in the Ozarks. Honestly, that might be for the best. All I know for sure is that, for me, everything has changed. Longtime hiker and camper here. I grew up in Brevard, Oregon. Something really weird happened on my last solo trip that I haven't been able to explain, and I guess I just need to get it off my chest. I was doing a 5-day trek through Willamette National Forest last month. The first couple of days were pretty normal, just me, my gear, the autumn colors, exactly what I wanted. But on day 3, things got really weird. It started with me getting this really intense feeling of being watched. Not like the normal wilderness vibes, it felt different, more deliberate, I guess. A little bit threatening, if I'm honest. I tried to just brush it off, but I did end up making camp early. I was just so on edge. A little bit later in the night, I started to see these weird flashes through the trees. When I started to pay more attention, I saw 2 glowing red eyes in the canopy right above my campfire. Not like normal animal eye shine, they were huge, like 6 feet apart, and they had this really weird internal glow. It was almost like embers. They disappeared when I blinked, but that was just the beginning. The next day was a total nightmare of paranoia. I kept seeing these red eyes everywhere. They were always in pairs, always crazy far apart, never in the same place twice. Whatever it was following me. It was like it was playing with its food or something. It all came to a head that night around midnight. I woke up to this really bizarre sound. It was almost like a whale call mixed with creaking ship timber. Then I saw them, through my tent walls, dozens of pairs of red eyes blinking in and out. Some on the ground, some in the trees, some just floating in midair. I heard these massive footsteps and the beat of wings, like a really big bird, just outside. But nothing ever touched my tent. Thank God. By dawn, everything disappeared. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I booked it out of there. I hiked 2 days worth in one. As I drove away, I swear I saw those red eyes one last time in my rearview mirror, watching from the treeline. It's been 2 weeks. I've looked everywhere online for similar experiences but found nothing. Part of me wants to report it, but who would believe me? I used to feel at home in the wilderness, but now I can barely look at the trees in my backyard without checking for those eyes. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this in Willamette? Or am I just losing it? This whole thing started when my 7-year-old niece, Lily, came to stay with me for the summer. I'd rarely gotten to spend a lot of time with her, so I was really excited to create a bonding experience. I've always been into the outdoors, and she loves being outside, so naturally, I figured a camping trip would be a great way to get to know her better, create some great memories, and just have an awesome time. Plus, kids are so connected these days with devices, and let's face it, so are we adults, that I thought getting away for a while could do us both good. I had no idea, though, just how away things were about to get. We packed up my old Subaru and headed out to Glacier National Park. It's a place I've been to dozens of times. But seeing Lily's eyes light up as we drove past those snow-capped peaks made it feel brand new. The first couple of days were pretty standard camping fare. We hiked, we roasted marshmallows, and I taught Lily how to skip stones across the lake. She was having a blast, but I noticed she kept talking to someone who wasn't there. She called it Whisper. "Hey, Lily," I asked her one evening as we sat by the campfire. "Who's Whisper?" Lily looked up from her hot dog, her face serious. "He's my friend. He lives in the woods." I nodded, playing along. "Oh yeah? What's he like?" "Oh, he's tall, and his skin looks like tree bark. He doesn't talk much, but he's really nice." I chuckled. Kids and their imaginations, right? On the third day, we decided to hike up to a waterfall that I knew about. It was a bit of a trek, but I figured Lily could handle it. As we walked, she kept stopping to talk to thin air. "Lily, honey, we need to keep moving if we want to reach the waterfall before lunch," I said, trying not to sound impatient. She looked at me, confused. "But Uncle Jack," Whisper says, "there's a better way. He knows a secret path." I sighed. "Lily, we need to stick to the trail. It's not safe to wander off." She pouted but followed along. I made a mental note to talk to her parents about this Whisper character when we got back. Maybe she needed someone to talk to about the divorce. We reached the waterfall without incident, and I have to admit it was pretty spectacular. Lily was entranced, watching the water thunder down the rocks. I was setting up our picnic when I heard her shout, "Whisper, no, you're not supposed to show yourself to grown-ups." I turned, expecting to see her talking to the air again. What I saw instead nearly gave me a heart attack. Standing next to Lily, with one long, gnarled hand on her shoulder, was something. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with limbs like tree branches and skin that looked like rough bark. Its face, if you could call it that, was a hollow in the trunk with 2 glowing points of light for eyes. I froze. Lily looked from the creature to me, her face a mix of excitement and worry. "Uncle Jack, this is Whisper. I told him not to come out, but he wanted to meet you." My mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating or dreaming or something. But as I watched, the creature Whisper moved. It was fluid, like a tree swaying in the wind, but unmistakably deliberate. I found my voice, though it came out as a croak. "Lily, come here. Right now." She frowned. "It's okay, Uncle Jack. Whisper's my friend. He won't hurt us." The creature tilted its head, those pinpricks of light focusing on me. Then, slowly, it raised its free hand, and what I realized was a wave. I didn't know whether to wave back, run, or faint. I compromised by taking a shaky step forward. "Lily, please, come here." She looked up at Whisper, then back at me. "It's okay," she said again, but this time she was talking to the creature. "Uncle Jack's nice. He just doesn't understand yet." Whisper nodded, and gently nudged Lily toward me. She walked over and took my hand. I pulled her close, my eyes never leaving this creature. What is he?" I managed to ask. Lily shrugged. "I don't know. He's a forest spirit. He protects the trees and animals. He says not many people can see him anymore, though." As if to demonstrate, a squirrel scampered up to Whisper and climbed onto his shoulder. The creature reached up and gently stroked its head. I felt like I was losing my mind. I mean, what in the Twilight Zone was going on here? But the longer I looked at Whisper, the less terrifying he seemed. There was a gentleness to him, a quiet wisdom in those weird glowing eyes. He's real," I said, more to myself than to Lily. She grinned. "I told you." Whisper took a step toward us, and I tensed. But he simply bent down and picked up a fallen leaf. With movements almost too quick to follow, he folded and twisted it. When he held it out to me, it had become a perfectly crafted leaf boat. My hand shook as I reached out to take it. The leaf felt cool and slightly damp, undeniably real. "Thank you," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. Whisper nodded again, then looked at Lily. She cocked her head as if listening, then turned to me. "He says he has to go now. People aren't supposed to see him for too long. But he wanted you to know he's real, so you wouldn't worry about me talking to him." I nodded dumbly. What else could I do? Whisper raised his hand in another wave, then simply faded. One moment he was there. The next he was gone, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer in the air. Lily squeezed my hand. "Are you okay, Uncle Jack?" I looked down at her and then at the leaf boat in my hand. I'm not sure, kiddo. That was, pretty cool, right? She grinned. I couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, pretty cool, I guess. But, hey, maybe we keep this between us. Okay? I don't think your parents would understand. She nodded solemnly. Whisper said the same thing. He says most grown-ups forget how to see. As we packed up our picnic and headed back down the trail, I found myself looking at the forest with new eyes. What else was out there that I had forgotten how to see? I've been a forest ranger at Pisgah National Forest for going on 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen it all: wildflowers that bloom only at night, albino squirrels, even the occasional bear that's too smart for its own good. But what I encountered last month, that takes the cake. It was a Tuesday, I remember that clearly. I was doing my usual rounds, checking on some of the more remote areas of the forest. We'd had some issues with illegal campers leaving trash behind, so I was keeping an eye out for any signs of human activity where there shouldn't be. The day was warm but not too hot. One of those perfect early fall days where the leaves are just starting to think about changing color. I'd been hiking for about 4 hours when I came across a grove I didn't recognize. Now, that might sound strange. How could I not recognize part of the forest I've worked in for over a decade? But Pisgah is big, almost 170,000 acres, and while I knew it better than most, there are still pockets that can surprise you. This grove was different. The trees were old, that much was clear. Massive trunks that would take 3 or 4 people to wrap their arms around. But it wasn't just their size that caught my attention. There was something about the way they were arranged, almost like they were huddled together. I approached slowly, my ranger instincts kicking in. As I got closer, I noticed the air felt different, thicker, somehow like the humidity had suddenly spiked. There was a smell, too. Not unpleasant, but strong, like damp earth and something else I couldn't quite place. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the leaves, but there was no breeze. It was a low humming sound, almost below the threshold of human hearing. I felt it more than I heard it, really, a vibration in my chest. I put my hand on the nearest tree trunk, thinking maybe it was some kind of insect activity inside the wood. The moment my skin touched the bark, the humming stopped. For a second, everything was dead silent. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just me and these trees. Then it started again, but it was different this time. It was like, well, the closest thing I can compare it to is those videos where they speed up plant growth. You know, the ones where you see a seed pushing up through the soil and unfurling its leaves in a matter of seconds. Time lapses. Yeah, those. All around me, I could hear creaking and groaning. Not loud, but constant. I looked down and saw roots shifting under the forest floor, raising little mounds of earth as they moved. I'll admit it, I panicked a bit. I pulled my hand away from the tree and took a step back. As soon as I broke contact, everything went still again. I stood there for I don't know how long, my heart pounding in my ears. Part of me wanted to turn tail and run, to get as far away from this place as I could. But the ranger in me, the part that spent a lifetime learning about and protecting this forest, that part was fascinated. Slowly, cautiously, I reached out and touched the tree again. This time I was ready for it. The humming came back, softer now. The creaking and shifting started up too, but gentler. It was like the forest had realized I was there and was trying not to scare me off. As I stood there, hand on the rough bark, the strangest feeling came over me. It was like I could feel the tree's life, the slow, patient growth, the way its roots reached deep into the earth, how its branches stretched toward the sky. But it wasn't just this one tree. Somehow I could sense the others, too. They were all connected, a vast network spreading out through the grove and beyond. And they were communicating, not with words, nothing so simple as that. It was more like feelings, impressions, a slow exchange of information that had been going on for centuries. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in this arboreal network. Could it have been minutes? Could it have been hours? I don't know. I was lost in it, though, experiencing the forest in a way that I never had before. A sharp crack snapped me out of it. When I opened my eyes, when had I closed them, I saw a deer standing at the edge of the grove, watching me curiously. When it saw me looking, it bolted, white tail flashing as it disappeared into the underbrush. I pulled my hand away from the tree, half expecting something dramatic to happen. But there was nothing. The grove looked exactly the same as when I'd first stumbled upon it. But I knew it wasn't the same. Or rather, I wasn't the same. I looked at my watch and was shocked to see that nearly 3 hours had passed. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, painting the leaves with golden light. I needed to start heading back. As I turned to go, I felt a tug. Not physical, but mental, like the trees were asking me to stay. I smiled and patted the nearest trunk. "I'll be back," I said out loud, feeling only a little foolish for talking to a tree. "I promise." I made my way back to the ranger station in a daze. My colleague, Sarah, took one look at me and asked if I was feeling all right. "Yeah," I said. "Just had an interesting day." I thought about telling her what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe it? How could I make her understand what I'd experienced? In the end, I just said that I'd found a new grove that needed to be mapped. She nodded and went back to her paperwork, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. I've been back to the grove several times since then. Sometimes, I can tap into that network, feel the slow pulse of communication between the trees. Other times, it's just a normal stand of old-growth forest. But I know what's there now. I felt it, and it's changed the way I look at my job, at the forest, at the whole world. Really, there are those who say that forests are the lungs of the world. After what I experienced, I'd say they're more like the brain, a vast, ancient, interconnected mind that we're only just beginning to understand. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very quiet, you might just get to listen in on their conversations. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. Around it, our small group huddled close, more for comfort than warmth. It was July in the Boundary Waters. But tonight, a chill hung in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. Old Joe cleared his throat, his weathered hands clasping a tin mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. His eyes, cloudy with age but still sharp, scanned our faces before settling on mine. "You asked about the strangest thing I've seen out here," he said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking hand-rolled cigarettes. "You sure you want to know?" I nodded, trying to hide my excitement. Joe was a legend among us guides. He'd been trapping and fishing these waters for nigh on 60 years. If anyone had stories to tell, it was him. He sighed, set down his mug, and leaned forward. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, making him look older than his 70-odd years. "It was the winter of '69, he began. "Coldest damn winter I can remember. The kind of cold that freezes the air in your lungs and makes the trees crack like gunshots in the night." I settled in, knowing we were in for a long one. Joe's stories were never short, but they were always worth the listen. I was just a kid then, 22 and full of piss and vinegar. I thought I knew everything there was to know about these woods. Boy, was I wrong. He paused, his gaze distant, lost in memory. I had set up my trap line about 20 miles north of here, way out in the backcountry. No roads, no trails, just wilderness as far as the eye could see. I'd been out there for about a week, checking my traps, when a blizzard hit. Joe shook his head. Never seen nothing like that. Snow was falling so thick and fast, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I knew I had to find shelter, and fast, or I'd be dead by morning. I leaned in, caught up in the story despite myself. Around the fire, the others were just as enthralled. I managed to make it to an old trapper's cabin I knew of. It hadn't been used in years, but it was still standing. Got a fire going in the rusty old stove and settled in to wait out the storm. Joe paused again, reaching for his mug. His hand was shaking slightly as he took a sip. Everything was going all right till I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But when it came again, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was a scream, but not human, not animal neither. It was hunger. Pure, ravenous hunger given a voice. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks. But that's when I saw it. Joe's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. We all leaned in, straining to hear. Through the cabin's one grimy window, I saw a shape moving out there in the blizzard. Tall, must have been 9-10 feet high. Thin as a rake, but moving in a way that wasn't right. Like its joints were all wrong. He swallowed hard. And its face, God help me, its face. Just empty. Wide eyes and a mouth full of teeth like icicles. One of the younger guides scoffed. "Come on, Joe. You expect us to believe you saw a Wendigo?" Joe's eyes snapped to the kid, suddenly sharp as flint. "Believe what you want, boy. I'm just telling you what I saw." He turned back to the fire, his voice low and intense. It came closer to the cabin, moving in fits and starts. I could hear it sniffing, searching, hunting. I knew deep in my bones that if it found me, I was dead. Worse than dead. Joe's hands were shaking in earnest now. I had a feeling he wasn't putting this on for effect. I doused the fire, tried to make myself as small and quiet as possible. But it knew I was there. It started circling the cabin, scraping at the walls with claws that sounded like knives on wood. He closed his eyes, lost in the memory. It went on for hours. Sometimes it'd go quiet, and I'd think maybe it was gone. But then I'd hear it again. That awful scream of hunger, right outside the walls. Joe opened his eyes, looking at each of us in turn. "You've got to understand, I wasn't some greenhorn. I'd faced down wolves, bears, even a mountain lion a couple times. But this was different. It was evil. Pure and simple." He took another sip of his coffee, grimacing at the cold liquid. As the night wore on, it got bolder. Started throwing itself against the walls, trying to break in. The whole cabin shook. I was sure the roof would cave in at any moment. Joe's voice had taken on a distant quality, like he was reliving it all over again. I don't know how long it went on. Felt like days. I was starting to think I'd gone mad. Maybe I died out there in that storm, and this was my hell. He shook his head, coming back to the present. But then, just as sudden as it started, it stopped. The storm broke, and with it, that thing disappeared. Joe fell silent, staring into the fire. We all sat there, hardly daring to breathe, waiting for him to continue. Finally, one of the other guides spoke up. "What happened then, Joe?" He looked up, seeming surprised to see us all there. "What happened? I got the hell out of there, that's what happened. Packed up my gear, didn't stop moving till I hit civilization. Told myself it was just exhaustion, the cold playing tricks on my mind." Joe sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. But I knew, deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Took me years before I could come back to these woods. And even now, all these years later, I still hear that scream sometimes in my dreams. He leaned back, his piece said. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a loon. Finally, I couldn't help myself. Do you think it's still out there?" Joe looked at me, his eyes unreadable in the flickering light. "These woods are old, kid. Older than any of us can imagine. They've got secrets we can't begin to understand. All I know is there are some parts of this wilderness I won't go into. Not for any amount of money." He stood up slowly. "You'll best get some sleep. Long day of guiding tomorrow." As he shuffled off to his tent, the spell broke. The other guides started talking amongst themselves, nervous laughter punctuating their conversation as they tried to shake off the chill of old Joe's story. But I sat there, staring into the dying embers of the fire. I thought about the vast wilderness surrounding us, the dark spaces between trees where anything could be hiding. And I wondered, not for the first time, if maybe there were things out there that defied explanation. Things that lived in the shadows, feeding on fear and desperation. I shook my head, trying to clear it of such thoughts. It was just a story, after all, the kind of tale old-timers loved to tell to spook the youngsters. But as I finally crawled into my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond our little circle of light. And in the wind that came through the pines, I could almost hear the echo of a scream, a sound of hunger that would never be satisfied.